The rain has stopped. For the first time in months, Noah steps onto open ground. Mud pulls at his sandals. Broken branches lie beneath a pale sky. Behind him, the ark rests in silence, dark wood against a world washed clean. Shem comes out first, then Ham, then Japheth. Their wives follow, blinking into the light. Animals move past them in pairs and leave tracks across the wet earth. You can imagine what Noah feels in that moment. Relief, grief, wonder. The old world is gone. The violence is buried. The voices that mocked him are silent. The mighty figures who filled the earth with terror are nowhere to be seen. Everything should be over. But according to the Book of Jubilees, it is not. Years pass. Children are born. Tents become settlements. Noah's family begins again beneath the same heavens that once opened in judgment. Then something changes. The children begin to suffer. Jubilee says unseen spirits begin misleading them, blinding them, and driving them toward destruction. Noah hears the cries of his descendants, and the question becomes impossible to ignore. If the flood destroyed the giants, what survived them? Hold that thought. Genesis tells you how the crisis began. The sons of God saw the daughters of men. They took wives. The Nephilim appeared. Mighty figures rose. Violence filled the earth. Then the waters came. But Genesis does not pause to explain what happened to the spiritual aftermath of that rebellion. It tells you that judgment fell. It tells you that Noah survived. Then it moves forward. Jubilee steps into that silence. It opens the brief account in Genesis wider. The sons of God become heavenly watchers. Their offspring become violent, die, and leave their fathers bound for judgment. Then it makes a darker claim. Their bodies were gone. Their spirits were not. This is not merely a tale about enormous warriors. This is not merely a debate about ancient bloodlines. This is not merely a strange footnote hidden in Genesis. This is an ancient attempt to explain why evil can survive the world that produced it. You need to hear the distinction clearly. Genesis is the foundation. Jubilees is an ancient Jewish interpretation that expands the account. They are not the same book, and they do not carry the same authority in every Christian tradition. Still, the question Jubilees asks is difficult to shake. You expect judgment to end danger. You expect clean ground. What if judgment destroys the visible form of evil, while its influence continues in another form? Noah survived the flood. Now he must face what the water did not wash away. Long before Noah heard his grandchildren cry out, another man watched the darkness gather. His name was Enoch. Genesis gives you only a few lines about him. Enoch walked with God. Then he was no more because God took him. The words are brief, almost mysterious, as though a door opens for a moment and closes before you can see what lies beyond it. Jubilees opens that door wider. Jubilees presents Enoch as a writer, observer, and witness against the watchers. He carries no sword. He watches, records, and warns. That matters, because the rebellion does not begin with armies marching across the earth. It begins with a boundary being crossed. Genesis calls the beings involved Beni Elohim, the sons of God. The phrase appears in the 6th chapter of Genesis. Many ancient Jewish readers understood it to mean heavenly beings. Jubilees takes that position directly and identifies them as watchers. Other readers have understood the phrase as human rulers or as members of a godly family line. Genesis itself does not stop to settle the debate for you. Jubilees does. Then desire changes everything. They look at human women. They choose wives. They cross the line between the heavenly realm and human flesh. You can feel the tragedy in that movement. Beings associated with watching become beings who refuse to watch over their own desires. Those who came near humanity to teach are now corrupted by what they want. Here's what most people miss. The deepest scandal is not that angels were strong. It is not that their children became famous. The scandal is that power stepped outside obedience. Power without obedience does not remain neutral. It consumes. The children born from these unions become figures of terror and renown. Genesis calls them Nephilim. That Hebrew word appears in only 2 biblical passages, and its exact origin is debated. You may have heard it translated as fallen ones, but that meaning should not be treated as certain. The traditional idea of giants comes partly from ancient translations and from the way later texts describe them. Genesis also calls these ancient figures Gibborim. That word means mighty men, champions, or powerful warriors. It can describe human heroes in other passages, so it does not automatically mean a supernatural giant every time you see it. But here the word carries weight. Genesis tells you what the earth became. It was corrupt. It was filled with Hamas. The Hebrew word Hamas means violence, wrongdoing, or violent injustice. It is not merely anger. It is violence that twists society until the strong prey upon the weak and no one expects justice to come. That is the condition God sees. Not simply unusual bodies. Not simply forbidden knowledge. A world filled with blood, fear, and predatory power. The first-century Jewish historian Josephus also records an angelic reading of Genesis 6. He describes angels joining with women and fathering powerful, unjust sons. That tells you this interpretation circulated among Jewish readers nearly 2,000 years ago. And so another man enters the account. Noah. Genesis says Noah finds favor in the eyes of the Lord. He is described as righteous in his generation, a man who walks with God. He raises Shem, Ham, and Japheth in a world where obedience to God makes their family look foolish and dangerously alone. Then God tells him to build an ark. You know the command so well that it can lose its strangeness. You can imagine the sound of tools striking wood while the old world continues around him. Men bargain, families marry, leaders boast, violence spreads. The mighty protect their names and expand their power. Noah keeps building. Now watch what happens next. Jubilees says judgment begins before the final waters cover the earth. The giant sons turn against one another. Their strength, once directed outward against the world, becomes the means of their own destruction. They fight. They fall. The watchers who fathered them are forced to witness the death of their own children. Then the watchers themselves are bound beneath the earth to await final judgment. Their freedom ends. Their children's bodies perish. And still, the human world is not declared innocent. Genesis is clear about this. God sees that the inclination of the human heart has become deeply corrupt. The watchers may have crossed the first forbidden boundary, but human beings have embraced violence for themselves. This is why the flood cannot be reduced to a war against giants. Humanity is under judgment too. The rain begins. Water rises over fields, rooftops, and the places where the mighty stood. Names mean nothing now. Strength cannot hold back the deep. Inside the ark are Noah, his wife, his sons, and their wives. Outside is the end of an age. Then at last the waters fall. The ark rests. The door opens. Noah steps into a world where the giant warriors are gone, the watchers are imprisoned, and the old centers of violence have been erased. This should be the clean beginning humanity needed. But it is not long before Noah learns that a body can die while the consequences of its rebellion remain. The next enemy will not arrive as a giant standing at the edge of a field. It will have no visible face at all. So far, the pattern is clear. Genesis gives you the foundation. The sons of God cross a boundary, the Nephilim appear, mighty men rise, violence fills the earth, then judgment comes through the flood. Jubilees adds another layer. It identifies the sons of God as watchers. It describes their children turning their strength against one another. It says the watchers are bound beneath the earth while Noah and his family survive. At this point, every visible part of the rebellion seems finished. The watchers are imprisoned. The giants are dead. The violent world is gone. But it gets stranger. Because when Noah's descendants begin to suffer, Jubilees does not introduce a new enemy. It points back to the old one. The rebellion has changed form. Subscribe for careful explanations of Genesis, Jubilees, First Enoch, and the ancient texts that shaped early readings of the Bible. The goal is simple: keep each source in its proper place. Tell me where you first heard about the Nephilim: Genesis, First Enoch, a sermon, or a video. Because the next part changes the entire question. The mystery is no longer where the giants came from. The mystery is what happened after they died. The new world begins with a promise. Noah builds an altar. Smoke rises into the clean air. God establishes a covenant with Noah, his sons, and every living creature. The rainbow becomes a sign that the waters will never again destroy all flesh. Shem, Ham, and Japheth raise families. Children grow, fires burn outside new tents, and voices return to land emptied by the waters. Life returns. Then the complaints begin. Jubilees says the descendants of Noah come to him because unclean spirits are troubling their children. The spirits are leading them astray. They are blinding them. They are striking them down. Stay with me. Jubilees does not describe these spirits as a new race of hostile beings that suddenly appeared after the flood. Noah's prayer points backward. He calls the watchers the fathers of these spirits. That line changes the entire account. The beings tormenting Noah's descendants are connected to the forbidden unions before the flood. Their origin lies in the same rebellion that produced the giants. First Enoch states the idea more directly. In that ancient Jewish text, the spirits that come from the bodies of the dead giants become evil spirits upon the earth. Jubilees works within the same world of thought. The watchers were heavenly beings. Their children were born through an unlawful union of spirit and flesh. The children possessed physical bodies, and those bodies died. But according to this tradition, something remained after death. These are not the imprisoned watchers themselves. These are not giant bodies raised from the grave. These are not children fathered by Mastema. Within the Jubilees and Enoch tradition, they are the surviving spirits of the watchers, dead offspring. That is the answer beginning to take shape. The flood removed the giant bodies. It did not remove every spiritual consequence of their existence. If judgment had already fallen, why was evil still here? Jubilees answers by connecting the evil spirits of the post-flood world to the unfinished consequences of the Watchers' rebellion. But notice what Noah does when the threat appears. He does not pretend it is harmless. He does not try to impress his family with secret knowledge. He does not speak to the spirits as though they are equal partners in a negotiation. Noah prays to God. He asks the God of spirits to show mercy to his children and grandchildren. He asks that the hostile beings not rule over them. He asks that the spirits be bound and removed from the earth. You can hear the fear of a grandfather in that prayer. But what do you do when you cannot see what is hurting the people you love? Pay attention to this. God responds by commanding that the spirits be bound. That command tells you something crucial about the way Jubilees sees the unseen world. The spirits are dangerous, but they are not sovereign. They do not move beyond God's knowledge. They do not possess unlimited freedom. A command from heaven is enough to end their activity. Then another voice speaks. Mastema. Jubilees calls him the chief of the spirits. His name is connected with hostility or enmity. He appears as an adversarial ruler, a figure who seeks room for temptation and corruption to continue. Mastema does not deny that the spirits are destructive. He does not claim that they are innocent. He asks that some of them remain under his authority. And the reason he gives is revealing. He points to human beings. He argues that the thoughts of humanity are inclined toward evil, and that he requires spirits under his command to exercise authority among them. The language is uncomfortable because it refuses to give you an easy villain. The spirits tempt. Mastema seeks power, but human beings remain morally responsible. Jubilees does not say that every act of violence can be blamed on a demon. It does not allow humanity to stand before God and say that the spirits made them do it. The world before the flood was filled with supernatural rebellion, but Genesis still judged the human heart. The world after the flood contains hostile spirits, but human beings still choose whether to cooperate with corruption. That is where the account becomes personal. You do not need the strength of a giant to harm someone weaker than you. You do not need secret knowledge to justify greed. You do not need Mastema standing beside you before pride can enter your words. External evil may pressure a person. It does not turn obedience into an impossibility. Jubilees says an angel teaches Noah plant remedies. Noah records them for Shem. This belongs to the ancient narrative, not to modern medical guidance. Its human meaning is clear. Noah prepares the next generation. He cannot promise Shem a world without danger. He can teach him where to turn when danger comes, and remind him that hostile spirits remain beneath divine authority. There's one more thing. Mastema's request is not rejected completely. Some spirits will be confined. Some will remain. And the number Jubilees gives is precise enough to be disturbing. The order has been given. Bind the spirits. Remove them from the earth. Noah has prayed for his descendants, and heaven has answered. The beings tormenting his family are about to lose their freedom. Then Mastema asks for a remnant. Jubilee says he requests that some of the spirits remain under his control. He argues that human beings are inclined toward corruption, and that he needs servants through whom he can exercise authority among them. The request is granted, but not without a limit. 9 parts are sent down to confinement. 1 part remains. 1/10. And this is where it gets remarkable. Mastema does not command heaven, he petitions it. He does not set the number, a boundary is set for him. He does not free the spirits from judgment. He receives temporary authority over a restricted portion of beings who already stand condemned. The darkness is real. It is not independent. Now the question from the edge of the flood can finally be answered. What survived the giants? According to the world described by Jubilees and First Enoch, it was not a hidden nation of enormous bodies crawling from the wreckage. It was not an army of watchers escaping their prison. It was the spiritual residue of the forbidden unions, the evil spirits connected with the dead offspring of the watchers. The giant bodies were destroyed. Their fathers were bound. Their spirits remained. Mastema was permitted to keep 1/10 active beneath his authority. The spirits cannot remain unless permission is given. Mastema cannot keep as many as he wants. Noah's prayer is heard. Most of the spirits are confined. Even the portion that remains does not escape final judgment. This is not a universe divided between 2 equal gods. This is not a desperate struggle whose outcome remains uncertain. This is not a darkness that created its own authority. This is a rebellion living beneath limits it did not choose. Mastema asks, God limits. The spirits obey the sentence placed upon them. Jude and 2 Peter later speak of sinning angels held for judgment. They do not repeat every detail from Jubilees, but they echo a wider tradition of rebellion, imprisonment, and coming judgment. Now move forward to Israel, near the land of Canaan. The spies return after seeing fortified cities and powerful inhabitants. They say they saw the Nephilim and describe themselves as grasshoppers beside them. Be careful with that report. Numbers does not explain how pre-flood giants could have survived, and it does not prove that the original Nephilim escaped the waters in physical form. The words come from frightened men. Caleb and Joshua see the same walls and the same warriors. They do not deny the danger. They refuse to measure God by the size of it. Here's the part nobody tells you. The deepest warning in these ancient accounts is not that giants may be hiding somewhere. It is that fear can turn you into a grasshopper before the battle begins. It can make you forget every act of deliverance you have already seen. It can persuade you that evil is unlimited, corruption always wins, and darkness answers to no one. Jubilees refuses that conclusion. Mastema has authority, but it is borrowed. The spirits act, but they are numbered. The Watchers rebel, but they are chained. The giants dominate, but they die. The danger is great. God is greater. Share this video with someone who has heard sensational Nephilim claims but wants to know what Genesis, Jubilees, and First Enoch actually say. The texts are already powerful when you let them speak honestly. Think of a family that survives a catastrophe. The storm passes, the ruins are cleared, the dead are buried. The parents tell their children that the worst day is over. Then an old cruelty appears in a new voice. A child repeats the rage of the father he feared. Another carries shame she never chose. The person who caused the wounds may be gone, but the damage still moves through the house. You know that evil can outlive the hands that first committed it. Violence can become a habit. Fear can become an inheritance. Cruelty can become a language taught from one generation to the next. That does not mean every wound is caused by a demon. It does not mean every illness, temptation, or destructive thought has a supernatural explanation. It means consequences remain. The floodwater can fall, and the heart may still need healing. The giant can die, and the fear it created may still govern the village. This is where Noah's response matters. He cannot see everything attacking his descendants. He does not know every mystery of the unseen world, but he knows where authority rests. He prays. He prepares Shem. He passes truth forward. And he refuses to believe that darkness has become sovereign simply because it survived in another form. The highest danger in Jubilees is not that Mastema is all-powerful. He is not. The highest danger is that human beings remain willing to cooperate with the corruption he serves. The spirits may whisper, but pride still opens the door. Violence still requires a hand. Deception still asks to be believed. You may face pressures you did not create. You may inherit fears you never invited. You may discover patterns in your family that began long before you were born. But the existence of a pattern does not make obedience impossible. You are not asked to pretend the darkness is small. You are asked to remember that it is limited. The flood buried the bodies of the giants. The Watchers wait in confinement. The spirits that remain operate on borrowed time. And above every chain, every spirit, every ancient rebellion, and every modern fear stands the God who heard Noah pray. So what should you carry with you after hearing all of this? First, keep the texts in their proper places. Genesis introduces the sons of God, the Nephilim, the violence, and the flood. Jubilees identifies the sons of God as watchers and connects post-flood spirits with their dead offspring. First Enoch states the connection directly. That is an ancient interpretation of Genesis. It is not a sentence Genesis itself gives you. Second, remember that temptation does not erase responsibility. Jubilees describes spirits that mislead, blind, and destroy. It presents Mastema as their hostile ruler. Yet even Mastema points to the corruption already present within human thought. You may face pressures you did not choose. You may inherit fear, anger, or destructive patterns from people who came before you. You may feel the weight of battles that began before you understood their names. But you are not powerless. A pattern can explain where a struggle began without deciding where your life must end. The darkness may speak. You still choose which voice you trust. Third, never confuse surviving evil with sovereign evil. Noah watches one world disappear beneath the water, only to discover that corruption has returned in another form. He cannot see the spirits troubling his family. He cannot build an ark against an invisible enemy. So he prays. And heaven answers. Mastema must ask. The spirits are counted. 9 parts are confined. The Watchers remain bound. Every hostile power in the account exists beneath a limit it did not create and cannot remove. Which part of the Jubilees account changes how you understand the Nephilim most, the Watchers, the spirits of the dead giants, or Mastema's 1/10? Tell me below. The flood buried the giants. But Jubilees asks you to look at what their rebellion left behind, and then to remember that even the darkness left behind is living on borrowed time.